Hi, I'm going to talk to you today about inequalities. Inequalities are statements that do not equal each other. So we've talked about equations before, like 2x equals 4, and then you know x equals 2 because 2 times 2 equals 4. This is a little bit different. So I'm going to turn the camera now and we'll look at some notes and we'll solve some problems together. Okay? All right, so here we go. Let me use a little color sheet here. All right, so inequalities are making comparisons that are not equal to each other. And they use They use different symbols to help solve them because they have an infinite amount of solutions. So that means there's not just one right answer. So some of the symbols that they use are less than and greater than signs. These may look familiar to you. And then less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. So that means that if you're looking at something like this, the answer, let's say I have a 5 over here. The answer could be less than 5, or it could also be equal to 5. Okay, so we're going to take a look at an example here of an equation, and then I'll show you how that's similar to an inequality. So for an equation, I have 8x equals 64. Now the goal is to get x alone on one side of the equal sign. That means we have to find out what x equals. And in order to do that, we're going to solve this by using the inverse operation. That means the opposite operation. So instead of taking the multiplication, which is what 8 and x is telling you to do, we're going to use division to solve, and I'm going to show you that here. So I'm going to take my x and leave it on this side of the equation, and I'm going to divide both sides by 8. So here, if I do 8 divided by 8 and 64 divided by 8, I need to do this to get x by itself because 8 divided by 8 is going to just leave me with x over here on this side of the equation. And over here, 64 divided by 8 gives me 8. Okay, so it's kind of like when we talked about fact families and we said if you have multiply, you can divide to get the opposite, and that told me what my answer is. So another way to look at this is if I go back to the original equation here, 8x equals 64, what it's really saying is 8 times what equals 64. And since I got 8 for my answer, it's telling me that I can say 8 times 8 is 64. Okay? Now, if I take a look at this as an inequality, what that's saying is, what can I do with my greater than, less than, or greater than, equal to sign, less than, equal to sign? So if I look at this just a little bit differently, instead of having 8x equals 64, I changed it to 8x is greater than 64. So if I solve the same exact way and I divide by 8, that's going to give me x is greater than 8. Okay? So all I did was change the equal sign to a greater than sign. So when x is greater than 8, then that means x could equal things like 9 or 10 or 20, because all of those numbers are greater than 8. And this is why it's said that it has an infinite amount of solutions, because I could even say something like 100, because 100 is greater than 8. And if I plug 100 back into my original equation, I can do 8 times 100 and say this is 800, and 800 is definitely greater than 64. Okay, so now if I look at it as changing this operation sign to the opposite, now I have 8x is less than 64. So if I solve again, and I know that x is going to be 8, this is saying x is less than 8. Okay? If I divide both sides by 8, I get x is less than 8. So now, since it's changed a little bit, x has to be less than 8. I know that x could be 7, x could be 6, x could be 4, x could be 0. 0 is less than 8. X could even be a negative number, like -1. All of those numbers are less than 8. So if I said, I'm going to put 0 in here, 8 times 0 is 0, and 0 is definitely less than 64. Okay? Now, if I take a look at these other symbols here, this is greater than or equal to. So again, if I solve by dividing by 8, I know 8 divided by 8 is 1, so I have 1x left. 64 divided by 8 is 8. And my symbol here says x is greater than or equal to 8. So this time, I can use any of these numbers I have over here still. I can say x is equal to 100, or 20, or 10, or 9, just like I did over here. But I can also say this time x is equal to 8. Because if I say 8 times 8, that's equal to 64, and that's what I'm saying over here. This is like a combination of the greater than sign and the equal sign put together. Okay? So same thing here. If I know x is less than or equal to 64, x can equal anything that I had over here. It can be -1, 0, 4, 6. It can also be 8. Because if I take 8 and plug it in here, 8 times 8 is 64, and 64 is equal to 64. So I'm going to stop there, and if you have any questions, you can always contact me. Thank you for listening.